Welcome back to J48 Ministries with Jonathan Pike and Will Bailey. Well, we'll be starting a new series, Rapture Watch. This part, timing.
All righty. Thank you, Will. All right, we're in some interesting times right now. The world is shaping up to things that Jesus warned us about over here in Matthew chapter 24. And throughout his Gospels, the disciples were curious, and they were asking, they said, Master, when are going to be the signs of thy coming and the end of the world? And Jesus, very briefly, right here in what we have, what chapter I'm going to be using, in Matthew chapter 24, he breaks down some of these events, some current events that are taking place. And today I really want to focus on what he says right there in Matthew chapter 24, verse 34. He says, Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till these things be fulfilled. Now, one thing that's very interesting about that was Jesus knew Israel would kind of dissolve away. All right, at this time they are a nation, but they're under the Roman rule. And shortly after Jesus' death, resurrection, around 70 A.D., the Roman Empire destroyed the second temple there in Jerusalem, and more or less from that point on tried to annihilate and get rid of the Jewish people. As a matter of fact, they were creating war all over them, and the Jewish people fought back very well, and the Romans decided that we're just going to kind of annihilate them and rename this area to Palestine, and maybe history will forget them. Now, when Jesus was telling the disciples all this, the disciples didn't know that. They didn't realize that these events were going to take place. So one thing that's very interesting is Jesus was speaking of a Israel nation. But now that here we are in present day, know those current events, we now can see that what Jesus was speaking of, and even Paul over in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where he was saying that these things will come to pass. You'll see these things, and where even Peter made some comments about a rapture. And the disciples once again asked Jesus when he was ascending up on the Mount of Olives, Master, when are you going to set up the kingdom? All these things could not have taken place at this time because Israel was fixing to dissolve as a country. Now, they didn't know that, but Jesus did. So, but what he did do, though, is when he says, Verily I say unto you, this generation. Well, the only way that could happen was Israel had to become a nation once again. And if you go all the way over in your Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 37, I believe it is, the Bible tells us of a valley of dry bones. And in this valley, God is going to raise up a nation, a dead nation. He's prophesying right here, saying, I'm going to raise up a dead nation. They're going to be dissolved away. They're going to be gone. And I will rise them up again. I will bring them back to life. I will fill them full of life once again. Even Lauren Daigle, the famous Christian singer, she sings about this valley of dry bones in one of her songs. And it is during this time that prophecy is fulfilled in our current time. And that happened in May 14, 1948. Israel comes together as a nation once again. For the first time in the history of the world, a nation has been completely dissolved, gone for thousands of years, and now all of a sudden they are back reunited as a nation under a nation banner, and people are flooding in. Now these all took place from the events of World War II, when Adolf Hitler was killing Jews by the millions, the Holocaust as we know it. All these things happened, but it set up the perfect timing for Israel to be rebirthed as a nation in Ezekiel chapter 37 to be fulfilled. Now, not that wasn't exciting enough, but here's what happens. Israel now as a nation is under restrictions, and they're really fighting for their life to survive as a nation. As a matter of fact, as immigrants are moving into the nation from scattered from all over right after the events of World War II, they're walking in to Israel as a new birthed nation, and they are handed a gun to fight for their freedom, okay? The Arab and surrounding countries were not happy about this situation. But what happened was, even as these immigrants are moving in, taking a gun, going in, defending, God intervened, and Israel, some way, somehow, and it was only God, y'all, God intervened and helped Israel become the nation that they are today. And what's even neat about that is they didn't just stay the way they were, they got stronger. And then another prophecy was also fulfilled that was saying that the land would be desolate, the land would be dry. Who could want this land? And even a famous American writer by the name of Mark Twain visited Israel in the 1800s. And while over there, he was looking around and he says, why would anybody even care about this land? Why would anybody want this land? What is so wonderful about this land? But see, God said in His Word that He would make it a desolate, dry land. But instantly, when Israel moved back in and became a nation, that He would turn the fields green and fertile once again. And that He has done. He has turned that into one of the greenest, luscious lands there is in that area. All around the Middle East, it's just dry, kind of deserty. But right there in Israel, it is very lush, beautiful green. But once again, a prophecy fulfilled by God. Now, here's what's happened, though. 1948 takes place. Israel is birthed as a nation. But several years later, in 1967, we have what we know as the 6-Day War, where many of the nations, surrounding Arab nations, decided that they was going to come in and they was going to just overthrow Israel instantly before any allied forces could help out. And as they come in, Israel comes together quickly and devises a plan and fights back. This took place June the 5th through the 10th of 1967. And as they come in, all of a sudden Israel fights back and defends off all of these countries, y'all. It's quite unbelievable. As a matter of fact, if you want to go and Google it, and look it up and read the events. Unbelievable situation what Israel did in these quick 6 days. But what happened was, it was little Israel against Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. Okay, all these nations rise up against single little bitty Israel, and Israel not only defends themselves, but more or less has them tail tucked leaving the area in a matter of just a few days. So then here's what happens, though. Very interesting time. Israel, when they became a nation in 1948, were not allowed to have Jerusalem or the Golan Heights or the Gaza Strip. As a matter of fact, there was terms and conditions to them becoming a nation. The land was previously owned by Britain. They had acquired it after the World War I when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and then Britain took control of the land. And then they gave it to Israel after World War II in 1948. And Israel was declared a nation. As a matter of fact, the United States was the first nation to declare Israel as a nation. But then here's what happened. Very interesting. They were not allowed to have Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, Gaza Strip, some of these very major important areas and locations to them. Well, when this 6-day war takes place, Israel pushes these countries out of the region. And according to the UN rules, if you are attacked by a nation and you defend yourself, any land that you conquer from that point on, you are now allowed to own. Well, Israel at this time gets control of the Temple Mount and Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, Gaza Strip, much land, even the Sinai Peninsula. I mean, a lot of land they took control of. Really incredible time. As a matter of fact, the one of the high priests, and there is a picture of him or a video of him as he's marching through the streets of Jerusalem, and for the first time, he's blowing. And y'all bear with me. I believe it was a shofar is what they're called. That their ram's horn, very significant to the Jews. They will blow this ram's horn, but this rabbi is marching through the streets of Jerusalem right there, and he's blowing this shofar. And y'all, I'm going to tell you, I believe it sent chills amongst the Israeli people at this time, because, and I think right all the way back to the time of Jesus, 2,000 years, this had not happened, where they were there on the Temple Mount around Jerusalem blowing this shofar. Unbelievable times. And then here's what happened. Israel, trying to keep peace within the land, because they are trying to keep peace, gives some of the land back at this time, the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, trying to keep peace. And something that they also do, which is very interesting, they actually gave the Temple Mount to Palestinian control. Now, they control the land, they control Jerusalem, and there is a line which is called the 1967 line agreement, and they have control of that area, but there is this common knowledge and this common peace that they let Jordan control the Temple Mount. All right, so here's what's been happening. For 1948 all the way up to 1967, Israel is slowly but surely establishing itself as a powerhouse in the Middle East. And then as fast forward as some time, peace deals are made here and there, all these things, and many people throughout the last several generations say, oh, it's time, Jesus is fixing to come get us, the rapture is fixing to take place. And I will give you this, honestly, nothing else has had to happen for Jesus to return. But yet something very interesting has happened. Back to Matthew chapter 24, verse 34. Jesus said, "Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass until the coming of the Lord." Well, what is a generation, and who is Jesus speaking of? Well, I believe our Bible gives us this answer. Jesus was speaking of the nation of Israel. Listen to me. Any time in the Bible that, or in the world, when you want to know when Jesus may be coming back, you must look at Israel. It don't revolve around the United States, China, India, any other country in this world. Everything evolves around God's people, Israel. So when Jesus was saying, this generation shall not pass, prophecy has already been fulfilled. Israel is now a nation once again. So Jesus must be referring to this generation, because remember, he was talking to the disciples. All right, so he's talking about our people, the Jewish people. This generation of Jewish people shall not pass until the coming of the Lord. So here's what I think has happened. Psalms chapter 90 verse 10 tells us a generation is 70 years. And here's how it says that. It says, the days of our years are 60 years and 10. A score is 20. So 20, 40, 60, 60, and 10 would make it 70. And then he says, if by reason of strength they be 80 years, yet their strength, labor, and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. Now, when the psalmist was writing this, he was talking about the generation of a man, of a person. How long do people live? All right, well, he gives us a hint right there of 70 years. But then he goes on and he says, if by reason of strength you make it to 80 years, all right, then you have fulfilled your life, your labor, and your sorrow, and you will soon be cut off and will fly away. So here's what has happened. Now listen to me. This is crazy, crazy events. 1948, Israel becomes a nation. May 14, 2018, Israel celebrates its 70th birthday. At this same time, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, declares that Israel, that we will move our embassy, the American embassy, to Jerusalem. All right? Declaring Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. We know that was the capital. The Bible tells us that's the capital. The whole world knew that was the capital, but they would not declare it. Okay? Donald Trump declared it. So now here's what happens. We were not the only embassy to move to Jerusalem. They were in Tel Aviv. Now they're all in Jerusalem. So now here's what's happening. 70 years, this generation shall not pass. This generation is now 70 years old. But for a reason of strength, if you make it 80 years. So here's what I think is happening. We know that Jesus was talking to Israel right here when he's speaking to the disciples, saying, you're going to have to go through this tribulation period. And we also know that because our Bible tells us very clearly the Jews have not ever received Jesus as Messiah, okay? They didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. As a matter of fact, in their eyes, the Messiah was going to come set up the Davidic kingdom, the throne, establish the throne, and he was going to rule. He was going to kick Rome out, all these things. But that didn't happen. So they looked at Jesus as like this prophet, and they crucified him. So here's what's happening. When Jesus is speaking, he's speaking of this generation, this current generation, and he's saying you're going to go through the tribulation period. Well, how long is the tribulation period? Our Bible very clearly in Daniel and in Revelation gives us the timeline of the tribulation period. It is 7 years long. As a matter of fact, you have the tribulation, which is 3.5 years, and then you have the great tribulation, which is another 3.5 years. This time will be kicked off by the announcement of the Antichrist. Paul tells us there in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. So then here's what's happening, y'all. Listen to me. This is crazy. Think about the current events of 2020. All right, the stage has been set. And what is 2021 to 2028? 7 years. This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled, Jesus tells us once again in Matthew 24:34. So here's what I'm saying. 70 years is this generation, and by reason of strength. Well, listen to me. They better be strong to make it through this tribulation period, through this 7-year tribulation period in time. The first 3.5 years will actually be somewhat okay, not bad, because at this time they will build their third temple. They will begin to do animal sacrifices in the temple again. The Antichrist will be a friend to them. He will allow all these things. But midway through that tribulation period, Jesus tells them they're going to have to flee to the mountains, flee to the hills, hide, all right? Make it to the end when Jesus will then step back on the Mount of Olives, busting through that eastern gate, walking in and taking his throne in that third temple. So this generation better be strong. But y'all listen, if the Bible is giving us a telltale of a timeline, it's now 2021 to 2028. This generation shall not pass. Now, many of you are probably sitting there thinking, yeah, but Jonathan, the Bible says in this same chapter, Matthew chapter 24, that no man knoweth the day nor the hour, no, not even the angels in heaven, which my Father only knows. So, and that's the just 2 verses down, and that's verse 36 right there in Matthew 24. And this, let me read it clearly. It says, "But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, nor the angels of heaven, but my Father only." Okay, so that's what it says. Very clearly, that's what it says. But listen to me. The day nor the hour. He didn't say we may not know the season or the within months, okay, or even maybe down to the year. He just said not the day nor the hour. You cannot pinpoint the rapture just like what we're going to do here shortly, and count down a new year. All right, you can't say 3, 2, 1, 2021. You can't do that with the rapture. You cannot pinpoint the rapture to that kind of specification, but God has. All right, and God clearly, Jesus clearly tells us right here, you're not going to pinpoint it to the day or even the hour. He says, but you will know the season. As a matter of fact, he tells us just a few verses above that, in verse 32, he says, now learn the parable of the fig tree. When the branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know summer is nigh. So likewise, when you shall see all these things, you know that it is near, even at the doors. So he tells us we may know within a season, within just a month, maybe 2, 3 at the tops. He says, but you will not be able to pinpoint it to a day or nor the hour. So I want you all, I'm closing out right here. I'm out of time, but I gotta, and we'll pick up some more right here. But the timing right now, y'all, is unbelievable, unparalleled. And I'm going to tie in some more timing to our next few podcasts, but there's going to be several of these, okay? So y'all be sure to tune in and listen. And listen, fact check me. Go back for yourselves. Look at this stuff. Look at the current events. Look at the resources that we have. Listen, if you know your Bible, it has never before been giving you warning signs like it is right now. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. If you would like to know how to become a born-again child of God, or maybe you just need prayer, maybe you have something in your life and you just need prayer right now, please be sure to comment in the comments below, and we will be sure to get back to you. Thank you again for listening.
Well, everyone, that is the end of our podcast for today. If you enjoyed our podcast, make sure you hit the subscribe and the little bell to be notified when the new podcasts are released. If you'd like to give to our ministry, please go to worship@woodland.com/give, and in the comments, put podcast. If you'd like to mail us a check, you can mail it to 114 Bayview Drive, Phoenix City, Alabama, 36869.